It's about feeling empowered. When you are surrendering to the unfolding of life, then that becomes your empowerment. You are connecting with a much bigger flow than our minds create in the world, because what we create in the world is very fleeting. But if instead my goal is to do what I'm called to do, then that is, I think, the greatest agency that could even be.
Welcome back to the Myth Slayer Café. I have in the house with us yet again Nicole K. Miller. Nicole, the last conversation we had was mind-blowing. It generated a lot of discussion. A lot of people watched it. When you said, let's do this again, I was jumping for joy. And so here you are. Welcome back. It is just wonderful to have you at the Myth Slayer Café yet again.
Thank you, Sky. I so enjoyed it last time. I mean, I was definitely looking forward to talking again.
When two people get together and have a great conversation, that just comes through, and the people that are watching this on YouTube feel that, and they get engaged, and they feel like they're part of the discussion. And that is, to me, that's just the best.
Definitely. Definitely.
We're going to talk today not about a specific myth, but about a mythical archetype, the wanderer. I love the image that comes into my mind when I think about the wanderer. I think about maybe Gandalf the Grey from The Lord of the Rings, or maybe I think about someone who is hitchhiking through the mythical back roads of the United States. Or maybe they are one of these people that hops on ships and just goes from ancient location to ancient location, seeing what's there, not knowing what's going to be next, finding enlightenment, experiencing all sorts of new things, growing and coming back maybe to the place that they started with all sorts of tales and adventures and wisdom, but maybe they never go back at all. What is the wanderer to you?
I definitely think the wanderer is that type of explorer archetype, and yet the explorer is also a separate version of the wanderer as well too. So there's this wanderer archetype, there's this explorer and seeker archetype. And we talk a lot about the seeker. I know we've probably heard a lot about that person who is always looking for something, either outside of themselves or they're looking within deeply. But there's an active engagement component to that. The wanderer is more of a surrender, is more of a allowing to flow. And so when you apply that to allowing to flow to life, then all sorts of things unfold that you had never had an expectation might show up. We often try and control our lives a bit, right? We may not even realize we're doing it. It's like, okay, I'm going to have a goal. I have a 3-month goal, a 1-year goal, a 5-year goal. This is the steps I have to take. And there's nothing wrong with doing any of that. But there's this false sense almost of I'm going to control the world and the way it unfolds. And inevitably, things will happen that you didn't expect, and challenges will show up that you have to face. And the wanderer looks at it from the perspective of, okay, this is where I am in this moment. This is the present moment that I'm experiencing. What's the next present moment? And they go from present moment to present moment. It sounds like it would be completely impossible to live that way. And that's not wrong because it is challenging. But I should preface that with saying that people do live that way, and people live that way in varying degrees. But it's definitely an outside of society sort of paradigm of living.
Let's break these 3 archetypes down a little bit more so people can understand exactly what we're talking about. Let's start with the seeker. When I hear your description of the seeker, I can't help but think of someone that I knew earlier in my career when I was still practicing law. He was someone that was another lawyer. He was unhappy in his early position, and so he went and got another job. Then he decided that the problem wasn't the job, it was living in New York City. So he went and he got a job in, let's say, Chicago. And then while he was in Chicago in a job that he supposedly was going to like, and in a city that he thought was better for him, he became unhappy again. And so he came back to New York City and then ultimately found another job that perhaps was a stronger fit for him. What he was really doing in all of this was, quote unquote, wandering from job to job and location to location to achieve a specific goal or to benefit from something that he learned through his journeys. Am I correct in describing that person as the seeker that you're talking about?
It's hard to say exactly because there's some nuances in there, right? So the seeker has a goal in mind, and the goal in mind is usually wisdom, or usually some sort of outcome, right? The wanderer is more about, I use exploration, but it's actually about beingness, right? It's knowing that in this space right now, this is what I'm doing, and really sensing that you're learning something from exactly where you are. And then when challenges arise, that doesn't necessarily mean it's time to move on, but it also could be time to move on. It's really getting in touch with that inner knowing sense of that your life is kind of unfolding in a certain way. So for the example of the person that you knew,
yes,
they sensed that something wasn't the right fit for them. So in order to maybe say they're a seeker versus a wanderer, it would have to do more with how they embrace that moment. So if it was, I need to find something that is going to bring fulfillment, make me a six-figure salary, do all this sort of thing, I can't do that here. And they're constantly looking for something better.
Yeah.
Right? They're constantly looking for a better fit, a better fit, a better fit. That's a seeker because they're looking for something. They're not in the place that they're in at the moment. A wanderer is usually fully in the space that they're in until they're not. Until what starts to feel like doors closing. And so it's less of a, well, then this isn't the right thing for me, and what I need is X. It's more of a, okay, feeling into, this is seeming like this is not where I'm supposed to be anymore. Where is the flow taking me? And so they move on to the next place of where the flow is taking them. But here's the thing, there's something to learn in all of those experiences. What is it that you have completed in that place? What do you no longer need to learn by being there or doing that thing? And so the next opening is for the next level of what it is that you need to experience, but it's not a controlled experience of it, if that makes sense.
It does. And that idea of control helps me understand more deeply the difference between the seeker and the wanderer, because the seeker is ultimately attempting to control an outcome. I want X, Y, Z. Even if they don't have complete clarity as to what that outcome is, they still want some outcome. It might be happiness, or like you said, it might be more money, or a social circle that I feel more comfortable in, or a political environment that I like more. That to me is different than just letting whatever you are in from a space or a temporal or a locational or a mindset perspective be ultimately what drives the thing that you get out of it. But let's contrast then both of those briefly with the explorer. To me, when I hear explorer, I'm imagining someone who may not be seeking a particular outcome like the seeker. Like they may not be seeking a six-figure, but they enjoy the stimulation or the excitement of the adventure associated with wherever it is that they go. They also may be more time limited in terms of their exploration, but the explorer implicitly always has within their purview, maybe I'm wrong about this though, the desire to go back from the exploration. To me, an exploration has a beginning and an end, even if it lasts a very, very long time. And so a very common example of that to me is someone who likes to go on adventure vacations. You want to explore different parts of the world. They may be hyper unplanned, hyper spontaneous, full of chaos and weirdness and all sorts of bizarre adventures, but you are not necessarily, you might have learned things from it, but it's almost like going on a series of thrill rides in Disney World. And I've been that sort of vacationer, by the way, getting lost in a foreign city or being surrounded in some bizarre location without a bathroom or anyone that speaks your language, and you have to figure it out, or your bicycle tire blows out in the middle of some bog somewhere in Ireland where there's no one around, and how do you make the most out of that experience, overcoming that obstacle? To me, that's the explorer. Am I grasping that correctly, though, or am I just talking out of the side of my neck again?
Well, no, I mean, yes, and I think is my best answer. Because, these three, they're nuanced versions of the same archetype. They are separate. There are definitely separate flavors to them, but they have a lot in common as well, too. And someone can encompass more than one of those three, depending on how they're approaching the unfolding of things, right? So an explorer, again, it gets a thrill out of the new things that they're learning, whether it's something physical, whether it's psychological, spiritual, whatever it might happen to be. There's usually an intentionality to it. There's still the explorers who are like, I'm not going to make any plans and I'm just going to go hiking and see what happens. Those could be explorer and or wanderers. It has to do with I think the emotional content of what you're focusing on, but it also has to do with the level at which you can put the ego mind's desires aside. So both the seeker and the explorer, it's, as you said earlier, it's about wanting something, right? Wanting some sort of experience, visceral experience, wanting an outcome, seeking knowledge. For many years, when I was younger, I would have categorized myself as a seeker, spiritual seeker, a knowledge seeker. And I was going to all different sorts of workshops and learning about different practices and belief systems. And I mean, I went to school, I had degrees, which basically would fall into that category of the seeker and that as well, too. And so it was a gathering of information all designed to better myself and learn more about the world, learn more about who I am. And it all had a figure out where I fit into the world. And there was definitely this seeker phase. And a lot of people see that as their spiritual journey, perhaps, or their life journey is, I'm a seeker. I'm always looking to learn new things and everything else. And that is wonderful. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that seeker view and way of being. The wanderer is less of that intentionality, except for this sense of, I'm going to let the universe decide. I'm going to let consciousness decide where I need to be and what my next lesson is, so that I can be what I need to be. And that's where this word surrender is kind of overused, admittedly. But in this context, there's a surrendering to whatever is happening for you is for you. There's that cliche saying that everybody says, it's not happening to you, it's happening for you. But if you look into that saying, that's surrender. Surrender to this idea that the unfolding of our life is not what we think it is. It is not about achieving. It is not about gathering. It is not about owning. It is not about claiming. It is not about any of those things necessarily. But instead, it is about being. And if we're being, What is the purpose of being? And that's a question that we probably can't answer today, just us. That's a bigger question.
Why not?
Well, we could have our take on what that is for sure. But I would never claim to have the be-all, end-all definition of that.
Where's your ambition, Nicole?
I know. What can I say? But no. I mean, there's this sense of just it, and acceptance is different than surrender. And a lot of people have trouble with the word surrender because they associate it with disempowerment. But it's actually a greater empowerment to know that there is such a bigger picture happening here than what our ego mind is laying out for us as the definitions of our life. That if we are tapped into that and letting that kind of be in charge, then things unfold in a very, very different way.
There's a lot you're saying, and of course it has generated in my little mind a lot of questions. Let me start with a definitional one. Mm-hmm. When you say it's about, quote unquote, being, what does that really even mean? How do you just be? I mean, sometimes I think I understand that. Just let me be. Let me do what I want to and don't bother me. But I think you're talking about something more subtle and sublime than that, than stay off my turf. So what is being to you?
It's just being alive. The fact that we're alive, that we're aware of who we are, of what is happening around us, of what we're experiencing, the awareness itself of that is the beingness. You know, we hear people talking about being present.
Yes.
Right? And most people can't just simply be present all the time. And it's because we are constantly living in the past and past fears, past experiences. We're attached to it. We don't want it to happen again, or we live in it because it was something that felt comfortable to us and we're not so sure about our present moment. Or we look to the future, and the future is always fantasy because it's either a future of fear or hope or a mixture of both. It can't be anything else because it hasn't happened yet. Mm-hmm. And so if we're spending all of our time in the planning phases, just to say, this does not mean that you don't have to, say to yourself, okay, well, I have rent, due, and I have things in, so I'm going to put some things in place, some logistical things. We're still operating in the world. There's still things practical logistical things that we do, that are doing as opposed to being. But if you're resting in that present space of, in this moment, this is what's happening, a lot of times those fears drop away. A lot of times the anxiety drops away because in this moment, those things aren't happening. Now, that's not to say if you happen to be in a moment of trauma, then that moment is going to be filled with a lot of experiences that you're having to process and or protect yourself from or do whatever it might happen to be. But the majority of us are living in a moment of fear or trauma from the past or an anticipation of a moment or fear or trauma of the future, and not actually this moment. In this moment, I am okay.
I'm about to describe an experience that I had. But before I describe it, I want to be very clear. I'm not endorsing any sort of illegal behavior by anyone. I am not endorsing any form of or modality of mental health, spiritual, psychological, or other treatment without the assistance of a qualified mental health or medical or other type of professional. And I am not encouraging or endorsing this behavior at all. I'm simply describing something that I did, which was a journey with psilocybin magic mushrooms. This journey had a mythical arc that played out visually emotionally and through other senses during the course of the sacred ceremony within which I had that psilocybin experience. At one point, the narrative arc that journey took ended, but I was still within the, for lack of a better word, psilocybin state. Mm. And during that period, the shaman that I worked with said, Scott, what I'm going to ask you to do is simply exist. Simply be. Simply float and experience everything that you experience. If you have a thought, crumple it up and throw it away. Clear yourself of those thoughts. Just experience being alive. Just experience being a soul, really. Mm. And so I found myself floating in almost like a cosmic sea. Although the cosmos itself, or a version of it, surrounded what I was able to see, it was as if I was floating on a bed of invisible water. And I remember thinking, oh, if I have a thought, I can do exactly what he just said. Crumple it up and throw it away. So I was starting to have thoughts, and I was crumpling them up and throwing them away and then thinking about nothing. I don't know that I've discussed this on this show before, but I have a swallowing disorder. I don't swallow naturally. I sort of have to do it sort of semi-consciously. It's in the back of my mind. It's like it's not second nature. Maybe it's first nature is how you describe it. And so because of that, I'm super careful about like chewing food correctly and drinking things in a way that doesn't cause things to go down the wrong pipe of my throat. And in this state, I remember thinking, oh, I can swallow normally. And I observed and felt myself just swallowing like a normal person. It, by the way, was incredible. He had music playing, gentle, soft, very melodic music. And I took that in. But mostly it was just about experiencing this sense of my spirit floating without an agenda, without anything. Nicole, is that what being is?
Well, that's a beautiful experience you just described.
I have to admit it was.
Yeah, it sounds it. So yes, I mean, I think is the simple answer to that. That is an experience of just being, one that most of us could not do with jobs and family and all of the things that we do. So we bring ourselves back to that kind of tangible world in order to do the things that we need to do to be in this world. But there's an aspect of us, that conscious awareness, that is only ever in that space that you described. Mm-hmm. But the mind is such a strong storytelling mechanism that it is always giving us a parameter. It's always giving us a yes, but instead of a yes, and. So if you were to, not in the context of the experience that you had with the shaman, but day to day, be in that state as you're walking through your life, would that be possible? Yes. Majority of people don't do that because what happens is a lot of the practicalities of life are seen very, very differently. They take care of themselves. So the beingness is actually our true nature. The mind creates narratives around us in order to interact with the world. If we get lost in the narratives, which are the thoughts, they create beliefs, they create interactions and everything else, then we forget that we are that beingness that is aware of being alive, and instead it's focused on survival. And the moment that it shifts to survival as opposed to beingness is the moment it shifts into the stories of the mind.
Why would I want to experience a space of beingness?
It's because it's your natural state.
Nicole, part of what I react to, and I would have reacted to when hearing the story that I just told to you about myself before I experienced it, was more or less, I like being busy. I like having a zillion things going on. I like having to put out fires. I like being on. I like the sense of importance, or the sense of experiencing life in all of its activities and all of its hustle and bustle and all of its emergencies and all of its fears. It's sort of like what you're asking me to do is to push myself away from the world's ultimate buffet table and sit on some mat somewhere and just lie up and look at the sky and say that's my natural state, when there is spiced pork and raspberry sorbet
and bagels. I love bagels.
Bagels to eat. What are you asking me to do, Nicole? This is my natural state. So what?
Well, first of all, I'm not asking you to, but it's funny because, so I've not had that experience, but definitely along the way. And part of this was, I think, I don't know if I talked about this in our last video together or not, but I was a teacher for many years, classroom teacher, and taught ancient civilizations and mythology, and it led me into the idea of the story, and it led me into archetypal psychology, and it led me to the degree program. But it wasn't until I was meant to be writing this theoretical dissertation that I found a non-dual teacher. And to clarify non-duality, for anyone who might not know, it's the sense that there's no other, right? Non-dual, no two, right? So the world of experience, this experiential world that we're in, we need to have another, because we learn by being in relationship with other. And by relationship, I don't necessarily mean partners or parents or kids, which are the obvious ones, but any, the person who cuts you off on the highway, and the server in a restaurant, anyone, any interaction with another being, or inanimate object too. This concrete block fell down and blocked the way I could drive out my thing. And now I'm mad at the concrete block, but it's a concrete block. So there's this instant interaction with the world around us. When you look at story and you learn it as a kid, you learn that some of the main themes are human versus nature, human versus human, human versus God. These sorts of thematic elements of what is the conflict that's happening in the story. Well, when our life unfolds with these storified conflicts, we have something to do. We have something to learn about ourselves with. But most people don't see it that way. Most people see it as that is who they are. That is their life. They're constantly fighting for this and they're constantly doing that, rather than the sheer experience of it. I'm projecting some inner story or some need onto this situation, onto this person. And that's an awareness that beingness in you is sitting there waiting to just go, oh, like that's not me. But that's a way that I can step back from the story of my life to witness it. It's going to the witness, which in non-duality is this idea that we are just that witness space that is in the beingness. I know this sounds very out there if that's not the way you've normally been looking at life, right? Most people look at life in the very concretized way of the things we're doing. But if you look at it from the things you are aware of about yourself, about the dynamics that are going on, you see the world very, very, very differently. You see yourself as part of this grand play, this grand experience that's occurring, and all of these different interactions and all of these different experiences are offering you an opportunity to experience it, which in and of itself is something, not with an outcome. The experience of it, the visceral experience, the taste, the sight, the sensation that you have from interacting with those things and those people. But a deepening level of awareness that you are just simply watching and being in this world, in your world. What happens when you do that is your life unfolds in a completely different way. You're able to let go of things because you don't have the same level of need and desire for a particular outcome. So it's kind of a roundabout way of answering your question in terms of there's nothing wrong with experiencing and loving the experience of life. But if that becomes your only identity, then there's a missing part of you that's not being deeply felt into.
The Greek myths that are the focus of this show are themselves stories. Actions and activities occur within them, and they lead to inevitably some sort of transformational result. It might be you ending up in Hades suffering forever, or it might be you founding a city. It might be you slaying dragons and becoming a different sort of leader. All of those things and many, many more happen. But to the extent to which, in particular, the mortals are engaging in these stories or not is a matter of controversy. In the Iliad, with regards to Achilles and some of his warrior cohorts, as well as some of the Trojan antagonists, there are passages where Zeus or Athena, or I think Poseidon too, other deities, say, I'm going to make XYZ mortal do ABC. And then these mortals do it. And they feel real emotions when they do it. They laugh, they cry, but they don't necessarily appear in those moments to have agency. They appear to be puppets. But hearing what you have to say about our state of consciousness, that being as a state of consciousness may or may not be, I can't help but wonder if the message beneath the myths, and in my opinion, the message beneath the myths is what they're really all about anyway, at least partially goes into what life can look like if you're purely in a state of being. The mythical mindset is one that is far more in touch with the foundational nature of the non-human world, for instance. It is one that has the supernatural or the unexplainable occurring all the time. And it has, as I've just described, human beings not sitting around. You don't, for instance, have Agamemnon, let's say, again, going back to the Iliad, he, for those who don't know, was the main Greek warlord in the Trojan War. He was a leader of the Greek armies. You don't have him saying, let's look at the data. Let's measure this point and that point. We'll come up with a strategic plan for attacking Troy. These are our contingencies. I want everyone to have XYZ tasks developed and put into SMART goals, and then we'll execute and report back at the end. Right? Like that shit don't happen.
Well, I'm sure he strategized, but probably not in that corporate way.
But at the same time, during a lot of the pivotal transformational events, the characters don't necessarily seem to be existing outside of that sense of being, or at least it's left up to us to figure out whether that's really happening. And these passages like Zeus said, and then they just did, have us question that. I raise that because to some extent, even modern religion has traditions or rituals or acts associated with it which seem to imply as much. The Lord will help our football team win and not theirs. Well, how does God do that? By having in one way or another the agency of the other team removed. They either do or don't do things that make strategic or tactical sense, or they have mistakes that occur or whatever that are demonstrative of a lack of agency. Is having a sense of being the same as having a lack of agency? And if so, is that a good thing?
I think I would answer it this way. Yes, and. Because that's always the best way to answer these. It depends on how you define agency. So if agency is a sense of empowerment, a sense of being able to make a choice, is that how you're defining agency?
I think so. Maybe after all of your ands and ifs and buts, I'll be thinking about it differently, but that's part of why we're having this conversation and so many others like it here at the Myth Slayer Café.
Well, so if it's about feeling empowered, let's start with that aspect of agency. So when you are in a state of beingness, when you are surrendering to the unfolding of life, then that becomes your empowerment. You are connecting with a much bigger flow than our minds create in the world, because what we create in the world is very fleeting, right? It's I'm going to achieve this, and then that falls apart, and then I need to achieve this, and then that, and we attach our identity to all of those different things that we're doing. But if instead it's I exist and I am here, and my goal is to do what I'm called to do, then that is, I think, the greatest agency that could even be. But here's the thing. A lot of people, if they see that as an excuse to, well, I don't have to make commitments to anyone. I don't have to do anything. I can just sit here and watch TV all day, and I'll just wait till things happen to me. That's different. That's closer to the Greek mythology of fate and destiny. Fate and destiny is not being in that surrender and flow state.
How is that possible? Because when I think of destiny, I think, okay, you surrender to the flow of life, and destiny takes you where you're going to be.
So destiny perhaps, not fate. So fate, and you remember the fates in Greek mythology as well, too, that they're making decisions, they're spinning their thread, they're cutting things, they're, whatever it might happen to be. So when you mentioned, Aphrodite in the Iliad, at one point, she decides that Paris should not be fighting. And she kind of like picks him up and puts him into his home in the bedroom and says, you stay there. And there's There's lots of examples of fate being written for someone and the gods having a hand in doing things to you. So here's back to that to you versus for you that we were talking about before. When it's a happening to you, that's more that kind of Greek myth sort of fate. I'm not in control, things are happening to me, and I just have to hope for the best, roll with the punches, and try and save myself whenever I can, right? But beingness, which maybe is more, in thinking about it, more aligned with the concept of destiny, destiny still implies that there is a intended outcome.
Mm-hmm.
Beingness and awareness does not necessarily have an intended outcome. It could, but it's not the point, right? The point is just the being in this moment. What is it that I'm experiencing in this moment? What is it I'm noticing in this moment? What is happening? And so that's not as much of a destiny, which is where destination comes from, right? There's a outcome. I'll give you this metaphor. There's a Taoist concept of life being this flow of this river. And I may have mentioned this last time or not. I always forget what stories I tell and what I don't. So forgive me if I did. But it's this idea that we're actually in that river, that flow, that awareness, consciousness of life. And as we go down the river, a lot depends on how we flow down that river. If you've ever been on a water ride, if you're lying there like this, really tight, or if you're just like, ooh, you might have a different experience of how you go down that slide. But if you're in the river and you come up against the rocks and you smack into them, well, you have a choice. Do you now cling to that rock because you don't know what else is coming, and that was really painful, and the pain of that experience is kind of you're going to hold on to for dear life? Do you try and swim back upstream because you know at least where you came from, even though that's not the way it's flowing? Do you try and get out of the river altogether and swim to the shore? Or do you allow yourself to continue on where you might have the experience of, maybe a heron is going to come over and look at you inquisitively, or maybe you'll get battered by a few more rocks, or maybe there's a waterfall or rapids that show up, but you don't know because you are the river. You become one with the river and however it flows, as opposed to being a separate object that is experiencing the interactions of being in the river. So it's a subtle difference. And so that's what I'm getting to in terms of that beingness and awareness is going with the flow of the things that arise in your life. I often have family members and friends going, "You're so resilient." And maybe I am, but it's when something happens that's either a disappointment or feels like the rug was pulled out from underneath me, or there's a challenging moment, and I've had a lot of those. There's this momentary, perhaps, reaction to it, and then there's okay, that there's information in there for me. And so what's next? And so there is some doing in there next, which is a thinking about bringing myself to whatever is next. But there's always this mindfulness underneath it that people don't realize of, I'm not in control of what happens next, that I am actually surrendering to what happens next, realizing that what's happening now is the experience that I'm having, and that this experience is telling me that this is not where I need to be anymore, or what I need to be experiencing for whatever reason that I don't need to know necessarily. And so there's an embracing of that instead, which then allows you to continue on down the river to see what unfolds as it unfolds.
Nicole, I personally believe in the concept of destiny. I don't think that belief negates our free will. I don't think that means that there is only one destiny that each of us potentially has. I don't think that doesn't account for or allow for a whole host of variables on the pathway to that destiny. But I do believe that each of us has a destiny or destinies. that we can fulfill. And what you're talking about reminds me of, at least from my perspective, one of the beauties of the times and places in which I have been able to get into a pure state of being is that willingness to simply experience life. It's not, for me at least, one that is nonstop. It has breaks. It is more comprised of time frames than a steady state within a long period of time. But those time frames allow me to be able to, through this process of contemplation, through this process of taking in without distraction or without the need to control, have clarity about how I can move towards that destiny. And to me, when it comes to practical benefits of just being, and by extension of becoming a wanderer, the mental health and well-being and calm and lack of or reduced stress benefits are almost self-apparent, but understanding ways to move forward so that I can become optimally what I believe I'm truly capable of and thus am destined to be is a massive, massive practical benefit that, at least in my case, has paid off.
That's one aspect of tapping into that beingness, even if it's for periods of time, almost like checkpoints along the road, right? But here's my question: is when we talk about the concept of destiny, who created that destiny for you?
To me, that ties back into this whole concept of being, as well as the consciousness that you are implying is our natural state of existence when we are just being. I do not ascribe to a Christian, traditional fundamentalist Christian, I should say, view of God as a literally humanoid embodied being, or even a spiritual version of humanity that acted in specific ways and looked in certain ways and would, to my eyes, stoop to building a heaven that's made of earth materials like gold, or to stoop to building something like hell that would punish people forever, except as exercises in overall creativity. I view it more as the foundational, limitless, expansive state of the universe that wants certain things to happen, and that, as the foundational essence of the universe, of course, has the capacity to make it so, almost like the author envisioning a book, but on an infinitely vaster scale. And so what the author might think one day the plot looks like may ultimately be that plot, but how the characters manage or navigate, come and go, depending almost on the flow of creativity that comes through the author. So therefore, answering your question goes as to the whole reason why a universal consciousness would have created the universe and conscious beings or sentient beings within the universe. Presumably it wasn't just to do it and then just look at it and go, maybe it was. But even so, even with that, there's a purpose behind it. Nicole, I have come earlier in my life, I wouldn't have believed any of this. I thought the universe was just random and matter emerged out of nowhere and people had random gifts and all of this sort of stuff. Part of why I've taken this show in this direction is because all of this ties into themes of personal development, of leadership, of growth, of the mythical mindset that we were not. It's incomprehensible to me that the vastness of human individuality, the sheer number of lanes of the embodiment of characteristics, of dispositions, of experiences that humans and the universe itself has, is all just lucky coincidence. We were, I've come to believe, given our gifts to experience them and embody them in life one way or the other. And they, by the way, might not just be gifts. They are, like I mentioned earlier, experiences, but they also may be drives or desires. It may be that someone, for instance, wants to really, feels from the time they were a child, a desire to really, really be sexy and voluptuous and to have a spectacular body. And they devote their entire life doing all sorts of things to make it so, because that was their destiny, to be that person that experiences having that sort of body, or that sort of sexual desire, or that sort of hardship, or to even sacrifice themselves for the larger narrative of those around them. So to me, then, going back to what I'm hearing behind your question is, do we have a destiny? What is destiny? Destiny is the creative expression, at least to the best of my thinking right now, of that consciousness. Being and tapping into that is allowing us to be able to literally, fully, as you said, exist in concert, or at least in an attempt to be in concert with that consciousness.
There's two layers of purpose, right? There's what we want, we think our purpose is, that's coming from the ego mind. And the place of the soul, if you will, to take it out of a religious context, but just from that seed of consciousness that's in us, right? That's connected to something far bigger, that its drive and calling, and to use the term as you are, destiny, where is it going? What is its experience is going to be in this life? And it's part of the bigger whole. I come at things from the non-dual perspective, where it is all part of that whole. We are all everything. Everything that we experience of someone else is about ourselves, is about that, is witnessing, is that experience of it. When the focus becomes from the mind's perspective of a destiny and achievement and outcome, it's a different type of destiny. It's a more narrative destiny. It's a storified destiny. It needs to have, I'm going to achieve greatness, that is my destiny, which is very, from mythology, standpoint, happens everywhere. That drive to achieve that perceived destiny becomes a narrative. And that's a narrative of the ego mind that is not necessarily coming from that place of awareness and consciousness and beingness. However, there could potentially be that concept of that destiny of, why is this experience of this person, this being who is here now experiencing all the things of the world, is there a reason and a purpose for that particular piece of consciousness and awareness to be living their life the way they are and the things unfolding the way they are? Potentially, absolutely, yes. But I wouldn't purport to know. But in a way, it's similar to the idea of this, of the vision board, right? And often people do these vision boards because of what they want to bring into their life, and they cut out pictures, they do drawings and things like that. And when the vision board is based on what the ego wants, it's an entirely different vision board than surrender. Surrender is what the conscious unfolding of life wants for you, what the bigger picture of why you're here wants for you to experience, versus what the mind is saying, I would like this car, I would like this job, I would like this partner, I would like to live here. Like, then if you achieve them or don't achieve them, there is a sense of accomplishment or failure, right? How come the universe didn't give me that, beach house or whatever it is? So there's a few different interrelated kind of concepts of that, as opposed to this sense of I know that I'm here, and this experience of being alive and being aware and being consciousness in this life is serving some sort of purpose, even if the purpose is just learning something about myself, or the bigger picture learning, having experiences so that it can learn about for itself. Whatever, I don't purport to know the answer to that question. I can only say what my life has experienced. And there was a moment in my life years ago that things seemed to just not be falling in line with what I wanted it to be, needed it to be. It was to the point where I thought, you know what, I'm a halfway intelligent person. I know how to, plan and make things happen. And I was doing all the logistical things that needed to happen to make something happen. And it just wasn't happening, and it didn't make any sense to me. And now I've come to recognize that moment as what it is. But in that first time that I really had that experience, although I'd had that my whole life in various ways, we all do. We have those disappointments from what we want to happen or have an expectation that is not met. But in that moment, I'll never forget it. I was in Ojai, California, and I had just moved over there from Hawaii, where I'd been living for a number of years to finish my doctoral program. And I had taken a room rental, and I said, okay, I need to get some sort of job to help support myself while I'm still in school. But I didn't want to have a classroom teacher position, because I thought that's very full on. That would take up a lot of my time and attention. And also, who's going to hire me as a new teacher when I have to, for several days a month, leave and do the program and everything else? And so I just stood there after running out of money and not being able to find a job. I walked into a coffee house. I walked into a movie theater. I went to a lot of these different places. And I said, I just want to work. Can I just have a job? And there was always a reason. No, you're a trained teacher. You're just going to leave the next time that you can. Or no, you're overqualified, or whatever it was. And it just felt like I was banging my head against the wall forever. And what I didn't realize was that I was trying to make things happen. My ego was trying to make things happen for me to feel safe, rather than allowing where I was supposed to be to unfold. And so in that moment, I remember saying just a prayer, if you will, or just a request into the universe that I surrender. I'm obviously not in control of the unfolding of my life in a way that I would normally expect to be. So whatever is happening here, may my personality and skills be put of best use to serve what is.
Yeah.
And I just said that. And a week later, I had to move in with my parents. I was an adult and I didn't know where I was going to go. I get this email from a school in Ojai that said, we received your resume. We would like to interview you. And when can you come up? And this is a school I did not send my resume to. So
what?
So I wrote back and I said, how did you get my resume? Because I didn't apply.
That sounds wonderful, but who in the hell are you?
And the person said, I don't know, but when I came in this morning, it was sitting on my desk.
What?
For this position that we just have open. So I thought I was leaving Ojai. I thought I wasn't taking on a teaching job because logistically it wouldn't make sense with what I was doing and who would, allow me to continue my coursework and all this sort of thing. And I said, I said, okay, tell me when to come up and meet with you. And so I drove back up and I met with them. And not only was it exactly what I was trained for, the type of teaching I was trained for, but they actually welcomed the fact that there'd be a few days each month that I would be doing this doctoral program and that I would have a sub there and it'd be no problem. It was more money than I had been making before. And that took me through that year. And so
Wow.
that has happened to me at least half a dozen, if not more times. That has always moved me to a new place to do a new thing. And I know we're running out of time here in our talk, but there are several other examples of that are equally this recognition of, I feel like things are shifting. I feel like doors are closing. I can make something happen. I can make it happen that I want to happen. Or I can go, okay, I'm going to stop and just be in this moment and see what's actually opening. What are the doors that are actually opening? And am I going to be strong enough and brave enough to step through those doors? Because that's the next step on this river of where I'm going. Not forcing things to happen in a certain way.
So, Nicole, I have to say, I have experienced something similar. When I first began to really say what I call prayers or devotions, they are essentially out loud statements of some sort of intent to what I call the Great Spirit or the Great Spirit of Providence or Providence. There's a whole little litany of terms that I use. They would be for specific things that, looking back on them, were meant to respond to areas of lack that either I was feeling or that I was afraid were going to be in my life. Gradually, I began to let those things go and gradually began to shift into a different version, which is, on the one hand, more broad, on the other hand, weirdly more specific. My wording is something akin to, my desire is to be the vessel of sharing divine love to my fellow human being, or passing through me divine radiance, or in one way or another, at the absolute bottom line, fulfilling the will of Providence. Literally embodying the words, thy will be done. And as you're suggesting, as I do that, that's really a commitment, at least it's intended to be a commitment on my end, to leave the ego aside. Things have begun to shift. Opportunities began to arise. One thing that I realized was that a lot of these things I was asking for that had superficial appeal, and maybe felt like they meant something, were actually thinking really small. I want a nice couch with a cool coffee table. Like, that's thinking small. I want a house that has XYZ, or I want blah. That's thinking small. To me, the providential mind, the providential consciousness, as expansive as is something that could create or envision an entire universe, is as expansive as the universe of possibilities for any of us can be if we stop attempting to control them. And so some of the things that have emerged then have been these weird things like you just described. Who would have ever thought with that? Who would have ever imagined that that would be possible? Because it's such a weird story, yet it somehow does come to be. But I have to allow myself to, as you say, be, in order for universal consciousness to be able to begin to express or make visible to me what these amazing, wonderful surprises are. And then it also is, going back to this theme we talked about a little earlier, bizarrely empowering. I wouldn't have expected it to feel empowering. Yet, by realizing that the entire expanse of cosmic possibility, within, of course, the constraints of being human, right, is you do feel through that alignment with all of those possibilities a deeper sense of empowerment. And that's phenomenal. But I'm not moving around all over the place like a wanderer might. Do you have to be someone that's willing to and able to pack up your bags all the time to be a wanderer?
I don't think so. I don't think so. And going back to just a moment ago, I think that that is an example of that agency that you were talking about before. That agency can come with that surrender, as opposed to having to control that story of your life and the outcome and a destination and all of that. I think that wanderers are less focused on the destination. We hear again the cliche, it's not about the destination, it's about the journey. Wanderers are really about the journey. So whether or not that means moving all over the world or doing all those sorts of things, or whether or not it is just simply allowing that flow to flow through you and being in each moment that you're in, it can look very different for everyone else. It doesn't have to be a literal wanderer of moving. There are different types of the wanderer archetype too. You know, we didn't talk about that earlier. When we were talking about before with a lot of people think that a wanderer would be someone who just kind of gives up and, you know, lets the wind kind of blow them around. That would be a wanderer without agency. Whereas one that is actually fully sitting in that awareness and feeling like I was explaining before with the doors closing and the doors opening. That's a metaphor, but it's more for feeling that something has shifted and that your awareness needs to shift with that new space, if you will. And if the space means a different place, or the space means a different dynamic, or means a different experience, then that's something that you move around in. It doesn't mean that there isn't a commitment or obligation or a responsibility, but a holding of other people. It's be the easy call to just say, you know, oh, I'm a wanderer. I don't need to be there for you. Can't count on me. Don't, you know.
I'm a flake.
Right, because that's more of an ego manipulation of the story. It's saying, I don't want to be responsible for that person, so I'm gonna, you know me, I'm gonna be here, I'm gonna be there. If being truly in this aspect of the wanderer that we're talking about is about being fully present in that moment, and presence means holding the space for the person that you're with, no matter what's happening with them. It is being mindful of those dynamics that you've created and cultivated. It's also boundary setting when you've now learned that dynamic is unhealthy for you or for them. Then there's a moving on. That's a door closing in that sense, or clarification of that dynamic. But I think the bigger theme is this surrendering to the flow of life. And how that shows up as the wanderer often. Because of all the archetypes, I would say the hero sometimes could also be that surrender to the flow of life, although the hero usually has a quest. Yeah. If the quest is internalized as becoming more connected to consciousness, then in a way they become this surrender figure. And there are many different types of heroes, so they're not all warrior heroes. Right. It's all metaphor. When you come back to the idea again of how we understand ourselves and the world around us is through story. Whether we recognize that we are telling a story or not, whether it's a concrete story like a myth or literature or film, or whether it is just us telling our own story about what something means or what we want or intend to mean, or we're still telling stories. It's still the mind navigating and situating ourselves in this experience of life. That is an aspect of who we are. That's not all of who we are. And that seed of beingness, that seat that you can surrender to that is aware of all of those aspects. That, I think, is coming around full circle to what we were talking about before. I wanted to give another example of what I'm talking about with this surrendering to the flow of life, because it's not always easy and it's always challenging, but it's only challenging to the mind. It's only challenging to our sense of what we think we need, what we think we should be doing, what society thinks we need, what our family thinks we need, et cetera, et cetera. This constant comparison and wanting to again situate ourselves in where are we in the world and what should we be wanting and expecting, which is a story. Or just surrendering to what is showing up for you. There's a wonderful book called The Surrender Experiment.
I love that book.
Wrote. Yeah. And the Untethered Life, which is, the original book that he wrote, and then Living Untethered, I think, and then The Surrender, this idea of saying yes to what's in front of you and what has unfolded for you within certain, physical safety boundaries, but there's still that kind of embrace of this is showing up now. This is an opportunity. Let me see what's in that for me. Prior to that story I told in Ojai, years ago, I was in another whole career altogether. I was in marketing, and then it didn't feel like the right career for me, and I didn't know what I wanted. And that was my seeker phase. And so during that period of time, I was trying to figure out what career I should be. And I had an epiphany moment. My aunt mentioned to me that I thought you'd always be a good teacher. And I was like, teacher? I don't think I want to be a teacher. But then I found myself on this bus heading into Manhattan, and I saw the skyline in front of me. And all of a sudden, I had this kind of moment of awareness of, yes, you are a teacher.
Wow.
It was just this overwhelming knowing. And so I immediately started researching master's programs in education and found myself doing the program in a year and a half and had all these experiences while I did that. And then I worked for about a year and a half as a permanent building sub at these schools in Manhattan. And at that point, because I was already around 30, I had decided that I needed to have my own classroom. I needed to make a living. I couldn't just be an assistant in an independent school and make next to nothing. You can't survive in New York on that. And so I started interviewing anywhere and everywhere that I could. And there was no reason why I didn't get a job. There wasn't really any kind of reason why I wasn't getting a job. And I had even applied to this school in England because I had done a 2-week summer program in England and really loved it and thought, hey, that could be an experience. And applied to it, got an email saying, sorry, we hired someone, but thank you. I went, okay, I can't seem to get anything. I don't really understand what's happening. So I went to a public school, which wasn't, my training was more the independent kind of school route. But I said, it's a job. And they offered it to me. It was younger kids than I was planning to work with, but it was fine. It was in Lower Manhattan. And they said, okay, come tomorrow and sign the contract. Well, as soon as I had said, well, I guess that's what I need to do. That's what's, that's the only thing being offered to me. I got an email from the school in England that said, it didn't work out with the person that we hired. If you can be here in 2 weeks, this job is yours.
Wow.
So, of course, my family and friends thought I was insane, that I was even contemplating something like this. But I did. I sold my car, I put my stuff in storage. I bought a plane ticket. I, went out there.
Good for you.
And I was there. And it was around the time that I was first starting to really take chances in my life and do things that I wouldn't normally, as my personality wouldn't normally do. And I showed up there. I was there for a couple of days before school started and kind of doing planning and getting to know everyone. And then all of a sudden during this time, I get a phone call from a friend of the family who says, I just want to let you know your family is okay. And I said, what are you talking about? And it was a friend of a friend who lived in England. And they said, Nicole, have you been watching the news? And he said, the World Trade Center is gone. Planes have just crashed into the buildings and they're gone. And, a plane went down in the Pentagon. And so that's how I learned of 9/11 in that moment. If I had not taken this job, I would have been teaching in Lower Manhattan on that day, because that is the contract that I was about to sign the next day. It's crazy, crazy unfolding of things. But I started realizing that by trusting the unfolding, there was a reason, for whatever reason, that I needed to be where I was. I stayed for 2 years in England. When I was ready to leave England and I started feeling like that was not where I was supposed to be anymore, I had this overwhelming feeling I was supposed to live on the big island of Hawaii. I'd never really been to the big island of Hawaii. I'm a city girl through and through, so why would I not choose Honolulu?
Right.
But there was this pull to go there. So I researched a few schools that were on the island. I sent my resume out to a bunch of those places, and 2 of them responded and did phone call interviews with me in England. One of them hired me sight unseen, and he said, look, he goes, I don't know why, but I feel like I'm supposed to hire you and you're supposed to be here.
Whoa. So
I ended up flying to the Big Island and started that job.
Wow.
And when I was at that job, I met this woman through the community theater who was the head of another school on the island. She ended up bringing me to her school, and I taught happily there for several years until I found out at that school about Joseph Campbell and Jung. And that led me to the 𝗏𝗏 story that I told before. And it's been ongoing. And leaving 𝗏𝗏 was an interesting story. At the end of that school year that I taught, I had already signed a contract for the next year. The next week, I was supposed to meet with the parents of next year's kids. And everything was kind of in line to do that. And at the same time, I had been feeling internally like this was not what I wanted to do. This was not where I was supposed to be, and this was not what I wanted to do. But we were heading into the 2008, 2009 kind of recession-y time, and I went, it's a job. I have health insurance. Where am I going to go? And so I decided, ego mind said, you need to do this. You need to take this job. But my heart was saying something else. And I wasn't really sure what to do with that. And I remember calling a friend of mine who asked me point blank. And he said, what is your heart saying right now? And I said, my heart's not saying anything. What are you talking about? He said, no, what is your heart saying in this moment? And when I stopped for a moment, I knew that it was saying it wanted freedom. And so I told him this. Within 24 hours, I get a call that my grandfather had passed away in New York.
Sorry.
So I called the school and I said, listen, I'm not going to be in on, on Monday I'm going to be flying. So should I come in and prep for the sub? Can I just send you sub plans? Like what's She said, come in and let's talk. And I said, okay. So I came in the next day, and at the end of the day, she called me into a meeting and she said, I had a dream about you last night. She said, in my dream, you were sitting on a fence, and I was told that if I didn't let you go, that you would miss something really, really big that was coming for you, that was about to happen. And I looked at her like, what? And we both cried because I knew it to be true, because I knew from the moment that I said my heart wanted freedom and that I knew this was not where I was supposed to be, but I was too afraid to just quit without having anywhere to go to, which most people wouldn't do. And so she said, I'm supposed to let you go. And so, I mean, these are at will contracts. So it's not like I wasn't fired. It was just that the next
Right.
year.
She wasn't going to dispute you or give you a hassle for leaving, I assume, right?
Yeah. I mean, she helped me make the decision that I should have made had I been listening and had I been brave enough to know that I was not supposed to be at that school the following year. And she's like, you did nothing wrong. Like, it's even crazy for me to be saying this to you, but that's, and so after that meeting, I started figuring out, what do I want to do next? And I thought, well, this is my dissertation period, so that I'm writing. And I felt really drawn to Portland, Oregon, of all places, a place I also had never been before. I had a cousin who lived there and connected with him. He was a meditation teacher, spiritual non-dual teacher. And I called him up and I told him kind of what had been going on. I hadn't spoken to him in probably 20 years, if then. And he said, come visit us. And so I went up to Portland and I ended up becoming part of that community where I was going on silent meditation retreats and I was learning about this space of this non-dual space of beingness and silence, and recognized that the stories that I had learned about and analyzed from a depth psychological point of view at my doctoral program, that there's actually a space in between when the stories come up. And that space in between the stories is that beingness space that you and I talked about earlier. And I learned that by being in that community for 2 years. And we all moved to Mount Shasta for a little while too. And so being on the mountaintop in the middle of nowhere where, again, city girl, being there, seeing a bear, seeing, all these things. And I went, this is a whole different experience of life. And if I look at the flow of how all those things unfolded, and at that moment was when I knew it was time for me to leave that group and move back to New York. And so I did. And that's when Unstorying was born, which is, we've talked about before, which is the work that I do. But it came out of all of those experiences, that flow from one thing to another, that kind of embrace of where is the next place that I'm supposed to be. And so the time that I spent in New York, which was about 10 years, had so many more of those sorts of moments in them where it was like doors are closing, doors are closing. What am I going to do? You can choose to panic in that moment, or you can choose to just sit and witness what's happening. And the moment before the doors open again is what's called liminal space, that place in between knowing where you've been and where you're going. And that can be very unsettling for a lot of people. But when you're a wanderer and when you're surrendering to the flow of life, you start to realize that all of life is that liminal space. That we think we're in control. We think we know where we are at any given moment, but that's a trick of the ego mind. We're actually always in that state of flux. That change can happen in any moment. We don't know what's coming next. And for a lot of people, that brings fear. But if you embrace it, that's the surrender. That's the wanderer's true gift, is being able to be in that space and go, I don't know what's coming next. This is where I am. I'm feeling into this experience right now. And whatever is coming next is for me. And that's what I'm going to do with it. And so that ties in to everything else. And, I could tell you a million more stories of things that had unfolded in my life like that. Me moving to New Hampshire, what I'm about to embark on now. I'm about to leave my apartment and go traveling for several months and wherever there seems to be this calling to go to, and I'm working throughout it. So it's not just like a backpacker's holiday, but it's trusting that wherever I'm going is exactly where I need to be. And that it's challenging to the ego. Absolutely. All the time. And yet it feels like the most right alignment that there can be.
Nicole, this is being recorded in early June of 2025. It is, of course, going to be released a few months from the date of recording. June of this year, 2024, have been times of reflection because it was mid-June 2023 when those who follow me on this show know that I got what I call the illness. And you know about that too because we've discussed that offline. When I was sick, as those who have heard the story before are well aware, there was a lot of confusion because although I was in a lot of pain, suffering, unable to walk, for the early parts of it, even in and out of consciousness, no one could figure out what it was that was making me so sick outside of the fact that I'd caught something. Because I caught this illness in mid-June, it was like 10 days after getting it before I actually lost the ability to walk and went into the hospital. So that was moving towards the end of June when I was in the absolute worst phases of this. And there were a zillion tests that were being run every day, but as more and more tests were coming up inconclusive or negative, more and more intensive types of explorations of my body needed to happen. I remember at one point there was a type of scan called a gallium scan that they thought might be able to help figure this out. Then also there was a more intensive MRI that I needed to have happen, as well as some examinations of my heart. And we kept wanting these tests to occur so we could at least get an answer, even if there was nothing that could be done right away. At least a prognosis could be developed. And because it was the end of June, that's when the medical schools have their turnover. And so interns were leaving and new interns were coming in and they needed to be trained. And then doctors, it was the summer, they were going on vacation. And then the Independence Day holiday came up, and that I think was on a Tuesday. And so there was a whole period of time, Friday evening and afternoon, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, and then Tuesday, where basically no one was around and there was only a skeleton crew and they were only seeing people where it was, or a critical injury involved or something like that. And I was being told over and over, oh, we think we're going to be able to give this test tomorrow. Oh, we think we're going to give that test tomorrow. And it kept not happening. And I was in so much pain and I was so afraid. And this not being able to get these tests over and over, it was a classic case of where I was offered a choice. Choice one was to go all ballistic and be a total jackass, like I'm more than capable of being and have been many times in my life. The other was to surrender. Just say, that's what this is. Maybe I'm meant to learn something through all of this. Maybe I'm meant to experience this pain for a reason. Maybe a whole host of other things that I don't understand were necessary before these tests could occur. Finally, the months changed and Independence Day passed and more staff began to pour in, and the staff that was new was beginning to be trained up. And so space came open for me to have these tests. And Nicole, every single one of those tests was inconclusive. The doctors learned absolutely nothing from them. It truly wouldn't have mattered if I had had the tests taken earlier, because we would have been in the exact same place. I remember once I decided to surrender, it also shifted how I was dealing with the staff, because you can get very impatient with people, very snippy or very diva-ish. And I decided, if I'm surrendering and understanding that this is something bigger at play, there's no need to get angry at this. These are people that are working hard under tight budgetary constraints with all sorts of patient drama going on, and who knows what other things are going on in their personal lives. Why get angry at them? Why not just love them as the people doing the best they can in this world and take it at that? When I finally began to get the tests, the main doctor that was coordinating them with me said, "Scott, you've been unbelievably patient. Thank you so much for this." And I honestly told her, that's okay. I was meant to experience this. This gave me a chance to be something that I've never had the chance to be before, to experience things that I wouldn't have otherwise. She looked at me and she said, "Are you a psychologist?" I have to say, I have never seen someone act like medical delays when they're deathly sick were opportunities. And I laughed and I said, "No, I'm just a coach, that's all." I've always been grateful for that experience, because it allowed other things for me to experience even when I was in the hospital that I might not have otherwise. It more deeply connected me with the metaphysical, that gave me additional lessons that informed how I interact with people to this day, as well as maybe making those medical staff's lives easier, because there was one person who for once wasn't throwing a temper tantrum. It leads to a final thought that I have after taking in all of these stories that you've shared and this thinking, which is that being a wanderer sometimes might be something that is thrust upon us. But when it's thrust upon us, gratification of knowing that you've embraced it, in my case, the gratitude for having experienced it and learned that so much of what I thought was so important was completely irrelevant, has helped make me a different and better person. So much better prepared for so much. That's why our discussion about being and living as a wanderer is so important to have. Nicole, if there is a final thing that you would like to share, something you'd like to underscore that you mentioned earlier, something you didn't get a chance to say yet, what might it be?
I think that the underlying power of the wanderer is this surrendering to life, letting life unfold the way it does. But that is not to say that you don't respond to life, that there aren't the moments that there is a need to push back or experience the interactions that come along with life. But it's a shift in how you experience it, how you relate to it, how you identify with it, that happens. And the saying, "Not all who wander are lost," this sense that there's not that wandering around aimlessly, lost sensation. It's actually a found sensation. You've found your home, and your home is inside in this conscious awareness that you always carry with you wherever you are. And that appears as a wanderer externally, but you're not actually wandering internally. You're always standing in that ground of awareness. And it can be lonely because the external experience and expectation is that you're not living like other people do. There's this constant search for authenticity in being who you are, who you truly are, and not following the crowd. And that can be misunderstood. And, but at some point when that becomes home for you, then all of that becomes okay. Doesn't mean that you don't have those human moments of wanting things to be different than they are, but that's only a human moment. It's not residing in that home inside.
What a beautiful paradox that within its frame contains a truth, which is that sometimes by being a wanderer, you can be more deeply grounded to your home.
You bring your home with you wherever you go.
Nicole, talk to us a little bit more about what you have going on, where people can find out more about you.
Well, sure. So I do a process called unstorying, which is a self-actualization process using narrative and Jungian psychology, the concept of shadow work. The fact that the things that are keeping us from being in that space of awareness are the stories that we're carrying. And where do those stories come from? How do they arise? And how are they impacting our sense of reality? And so I work with people one-on-one in this process to help them really get that taste of who they really are, to see who they're not as we wade through the stories. And I'm also training practitioners in how to do that work with other people. And there's a book coming out soon too, which is using that idea on the narratives that are swirling around us in the world today. In the news, in advertising, all the persuasive stories that are causing people to separate from each other and causing suffering and strife. Where are those stories arising from? And why are we individually and collectively living in those stories as opposed to choosing other stories? So that's hopefully coming out soon. And by the time this comes out, hopefully that will already be out there in the world.
And that reminds me, anyone watching this who has enjoyed as much as I have, Nicole, your presence, your being here at the Myth Slayer Café should check out your prior interview, which is right up above my shoulder here. Just hit the link and it will take you right there. In the meantime, if you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe to my channel. Just press the little button below. Also hit the thumbs up and like this particular video. Leave a remark, leave your thoughts. Don't hesitate to connect with me or with Nicole via our social media channels that are in the captions below. And if you have any mythological figures that you would like us to discuss in future episodes, or any other questions with regards to myths or consciousness or spirituality or leadership or personal development that may lend themselves to challenging and enlightening conversations here at the Myth Slayer Café, please note them in the remarks too. We want to be connected with you. This isn't about just us talking, but you as the audience engaging in the conversation. Don't stop yet. Hit that subscribe button. And then above all else, come back again for another compelling conversation here at the Myth Slayer Café, because I want your future to be epic.